podcast, Boxing Edition today. It's brought to you by Ringside. Go to ringside.com/podcast, and you too can get upwards of 40% off selected brands. Guys, that's a great deal by Ringside. And speaking of great, my next guest, Eric Drath, an Emmy Award-winning director from some of the greatest documentaries I've ever seen personally. And if you know me, I love documentaries. Eric, how are you?
Very good. Good to be here, George.
Well, thanks for coming on. I've been trying to get you on. I know you're real busy doing a lot of things, but I want to particularly go back to familiarize my audience with you. Who was Eric growing up?
I grew up in New York City. I played a lot of basketball and football and loved sports, and got into boxing a little bit later in life. Buddy of mine invited me to a boxing match in out by Yonkers Raceway. Behind the raceway, there was a field house, and Joe DeGuardia used to put on these club shows. Went there relatively young, and I was hooked. I mean, definitely grew up on Tyson and all the great fights of the 90s, and knew about a lot of the fights from the 80s.
Well, let me ask you this, because it would actually kind of stands out a little bit for you. Why boxing? Boxing is typically a poor man's sport. And if you're getting into directing, I don't know which came first, directing or getting into film or the love of boxing. But if you were going into that industry, and I know you went to TP in your college, you got a degree there, was it one hand in the other, or was it boxing first? Because it's a poor man's sport, and if you were going to cover something in sports, you think you'd want to go to something that's more mainstream.
It's a great question. So, I mean, I basically got into journalism. So I played lacrosse in college, and I was going to a lacrosse meeting, and I took a wrong turn into a radio station, the school radio station, and I was just like, this is so cool. And a couple of weeks later, I had my FCC Class 3 license and became a newscaster for the college radio station. Then I got a job as an intern at ABC News, and it was during the Persian Gulf War, and I was hooked. Around that time is when somebody introduced me to, invited me up to a boxing show up in Yonkers. I was not the biggest boxing fan. I was more, into other sports. I must say, after ABC, I went to CNN, and then I went to Fox News Channel, which I helped launch the Fox News Channel. I worked for Roger Ailes. It was a dynamic time. Obviously he's a controversial guy. He was a great leader, though. I don't know, whatever he was doing behind closed doors, he's published, and he was wrong for. But as far as like starting a network, it was really exciting. And then I went to this boxing match, and I was like, whoa, this is so cool. And here I was, a guy who went to a good college, had worked at these major networks, and I walked into boxing, and it just had everything. It had the allure of, gladiator type sport, bring in one fighter the next. There was cigar smoke, wise guys, girls in hoochie mama skirts. I mean, it was everything. And it was really like Hollywood. And I was like, this is so cool. And I basically told my parents, I was like, listen, I'm getting into boxing. And they're like, what? And I went up to Joe DeGuardia, who's, one of the angels in my life. Joe is an amazing guy. And I said, Joe, I want to work for you. I want to work in boxing. He goes, well, you're a journalist, you could do PR. And little did I know then that being in PR and boxing meant picking up a van, picking up a fighter, bringing him to the motel, bringing him to get his medicals. And I was just a driver, a glorified driver. And but I loved it. I loved being around the boxers. I loved the sport. I was learning. It was so cool. I was making like no money, but I didn't care. But I didn't have any money, so I had to make money. So I always was a hustler, and one van turned into two vans, turned into three vans. And then I was driving fights. I was driving for Joe DeGuardia, Cedric Kushner, Lou DiBella, Frank Warren. And I got this unbelievable access to these fighters because me and my team were driving the fighters, getting their medicals. Anybody who knows behind the scenes of boxing knows that these guys have to go through a battery of tests, what they have to do, and we had all kinds of crazy stories. And so then I decided, like, I love these guys. I want to represent them. So, kind of blindly, I started representing fighters. I represented a bunch of female fighters first because those were the only ones that would sign with me. And then I got a fighter named Gary St. Clair, who wound up becoming a champion. And Gary was a great fighter, and I wound up probably putting him in a fight that I shouldn't have against Vivian Harris back at the Horizon. And then Gary calls me one night, I think it was Thanksgiving, and he said, "Eric, I'm stuck at the airport in JFK," because he had told me that he because of his visa, he had to go back and forth. Turns out that they turned him around at JFK and sent him back to Guyana, and he couldn't get back in. So here I have this world-class style fighter, and I sent him home to try to help him, and he got stuck there. I went down to Trinidad to try to get him through. I almost got arrested doing it. That's another story. And he wound up going to Australia and becoming a 2-time world champion, a major champion. He was that good. Yeah. So anyway, it's a roundabout way of telling you how I got into film. I'll get there now. And basically, so I'm representing fighters. I go into Joe DeGuardia's gym in the Bronx, the Morris Park boxing gym. And there's a guy there named Louis Resto. And he's working with the kids. And he couldn't have been a nicer, sweeter soul. And almost like the Lenny of Mice and Men. If you read Steinbeck's Mice and Men, just this quiet, nice, simple guy. And everybody's like, "Do you know about him? Do you know about him? He was banned from the sport. He was arrested." I'm like, "This guy working with kids? That's crazy." So I asked him, I said, "What happened?" And he said, "I got accused of something and I'm innocent." And I said, "Wow, you're innocent." So I went to my friend, he was in that fight with Billy Collins Jr., which I can talk about in a second. And so I went to my friend Barry Murphy, who, at the time was doing some business, and maybe, it's legal now, but it wasn't back then, and anyway, we put up some money and we got a camera, and we didn't know what we were doing about making films. And I was like, let's make this film about his innocence. So that's how I got into making films. I took my journalistic instincts from working in the networks, and then my love of boxing and the stories of boxing. And it's almost like the peanut butter and the chocolate that went together. And, and then here you go. And I started. And,
let me two things here. Number one that stuck out with me. Joe DeGuardia. I've done a show with him up in Scranton, Pennsylvania. I did a show with him. Great guy. You're right. A great guy. Cares a lot about his fighters. So you had a mentor there. Number two, you said you did it for no money. So that itself tells you what kind of a person you were, passionate about getting this film made, whether was the Resto film or what have you. You are passionate about this, which always makes a successful person. So going into it, when we were making no money, you're basically a glorified babysitter at that point. There was ever a point where you were like, this might not be my it?
Well, thank you. I think, identifying that passion is part of the fuel that drives a successful, career. I appreciate you bringing that out, because specifically with this story, passion was a necessary element, because there was a moment I thought we were dead in the water. So going back to the story, and I'll just set it up, is, the story of June 16th, 1983 in Madison Square Garden. It was a packed house. Roberto Duran was fighting. It was his birthday. It was his comeback fight. He had lost. And on the undercard was this Louis Resto and Billy Collins Jr. And Billy Collins Jr. was touted as like, the next, great white hope, or, what every boxing promoter likes is this undefeated white kid, good looking, ready to take on the world. And Louis Resto was this like scrappy Puerto Rican kid from the Bronx who was kind of just like, made the, basically a stepping stone for the next fight for Billy. But what happened by the end of the fight was an unbelievable upset, Billy Collins' face looked like he had elephantitis, and he lost bad, and the decision was given to Resto, and Resto, like a good sport might, went over to Billy's corner after the fight to shake his hand and his father's hand. And his father is Billy Collins Sr., who was a former fighter from the 50s. And Billy's father grabs the gloves and said, "There's no padding in these gloves. There's no padding in these gloves." And what ensued after that is a terrible tragedy. Louis and his trainer, Panama, were found guilty of tampering with a sports contest and banned from the sport. And and Collins, having permanent eye damage. Some say drove his car off a cliff because of suicide. Some say because of alcohol. Some say because he couldn't see. Doesn't matter. He was dead less than 8 months after the fight. And Resto and Panama Lewis were sent to jail and banned from the sport. So when I found Resto 25 years later at this moment at the gym, he was proclaiming his innocence. He said, "I didn't do it. I didn't know about the." So I set out to make a documentary to get him off, to be like, okay, this is going to be a great documentary. We're going to find out the truth. And along the process, and, you know, I'm a tenacious investigator as a documentary maker. You have to be. I came across some transcripts from a secret NAGRA recording, which were not used in the trial for legal reasons, where Resto actually had admitted that he knew what was going on. And so I confronted him with this. And again, me and Barry had no idea about making a film. We thought we were making this great film about, you know, setting him free. And we wound up setting him free for another reason, but not for the law. And once he admitted it, I was like, "Barry, what do we do? You know, we're telling a story about a guilty guy." And that's where what you just said comes into play, the passion. You know, I was like, well, look, we're too broke to just give up here. We've sunk in, like, I think we spent a total of 25 grand, which is a lot of money.
Holy cow.
Yeah, you know, it's a lot of money, you know, traveling around, shooting. We're like, what are we going to do? And, you know, I was like, look, maybe there's a chance that Louis can redeem himself. I said, Louis, and I asked him on film, and I said, let's film this. Because, you know, I wasn't even going to be in the film, by the way. The first version, I wasn't going to be in the film. It was just going to be a film about it, standard documentary. And I said, on film, Louis, I confronted him with this, and I said, would you go back and apologize to the family? And he said, yeah, I'll do it. Because here was a guy living with the burden of and shame of a crime that he was denying all this time. And as soon as he admitted that he did it, it was like,
yeah,
he was, you know, he was so much lighter.
Let me ask you that point, because that was a turning point in that. Now, so there you go. He finally admits, or you see the transcripts. I remember this distinctly. At first, you were angry, I thought. I kind of got the impression you were angry. You're like, Louis, like, because you confronted him, I remember, and he denied it, and he was doing the old, you know, dance around until he finally broke down and said, yes, he'll go see the family. It didn't turn out as expected. We'll get to that second. But that point, I think, would be probably your lowest point at the filming that documentary. You stick 20 grand into something that you think is going to, now you're actually going to bat for someone who essentially assaulted a human being in a sporting event on film, and you got to make a turn here. Now you got to pivot. How did you accept that pivoting? Did you try to, what was going through your head saying, okay, now we got to turn this into crap. This is a redemption piece now.
Yeah, and I didn't even know if that would work. You know, I was just like, we have to do something. We can't just have, you know, like this guy lying the whole time, and that's the film. Like, there had to be a churn, a moment. And I said, would you, you know, and he was still saying, oh, it's, you know, once he admitted, he said, oh, it was Panama. It's true, but it was Panama. I said, all right, let's go see Panama then. Will you go? He goes, yeah. So here's another moment.
Oh, I love this one at the gym. I love this moment.
Right. So I take him down to Florida. You know, we're in the parking lot. I'm like, all right, man, you're gonna go and you're gonna confront him and say, you did it. And so I was all excited. This was gonna be the big conclusion, the end of the film, you know, the moment. And we and the shot that was shot was beautiful. It started with him. It's this long shot behind him. We walk in and we follow him, and there we see Panama Lewis, the trainer, who had been banned from the sport, but yet he's still working, and he's got all this, plated gold jewelry that he takes off, to train, and we see him, and he's this imposing figure.
Can I jump in for 1 second? Did you plan that with Panama, or no? This was coming right. Oh wow.
Oh no, this was like ambush journalism almost. Yeah, it was. We were like all I did was call
a guilty man, though. To a guilty man. Let's be honest.
Right. So, and when I say ambush journalism, yes and no, because I did call him and say we want to come down and film with you and talk to you, and and I had a couple of really great people from boxing who connected me with him. So it wasn't like ambush in the sense that it was cheap.
Right.
It was just like ambush in the sense that we didn't know what was going to happen next. So all of a sudden he walks in, and I'm thinking this is going to be great. It's going to be explosive. He's going to say, "You did it. I did it." And whatever was going to happen was going to happen. But instead what happened was Louis walks in. Panama's on the corner. Louis walks up. And Louis melts like a child in the arms of his father, and just puts his head down and starts crying. And he's inconsolable, crying. And Panama's saying all the things that Panama has said to him for so long. Don't worry, someday I'll make you, your grandchildren richer than you'll ever be, and all kinds of promises, the kinds of things that he was saying to him all along to keep his mouth shut. And that was it. The moment passed, and it wasn't like there was no accusations by Louis. He asked, what'd you do? What happened that night? And Panama says, only God knows what happens. And you could the viewer's a smart viewer, and they knew what was going on. And we're on the plane, and I'm like, excuse me.
No, you're good. Yep, you're good.
I was like, oh, that sucked. I was like so pissed at Louis, because I was hoping Louis was somebody Louis wasn't. Louis, that's Louis,
Wait a minute. I thought, you may have thought because you're filming, sometimes you do stuff and you're like, oh, that was horrible, but it's actually very good. I thought that piece reminded me of a guy who didn't have a father figure. And if you've ever had a confrontation with your father, you will always bow down. And it almost was like, but the people, like you said, the people watching the film, I could see, besides the fact that we knew Panama Lewis from New Jersey, you knew that's a con man trying to convince someone who doesn't have a father figure other than this man, or else he's got nothing else. His family was gone. His kids weren't talking to him. And then all of a sudden he had this guy. And at the end of that whole scene, Resto was training kids. Did you see that? When you know what I'm saying? Like how that guy can turn you into believing that it's not you, it's them.
Yeah. He was like, okay, now hold the pads for me. And I want you to right?
It was ridiculous.
No, but you're spot on, because I get back, I'm really pissed. Barry was with me. I was so upset. And then the editors, sitting there watching the footage, he's like, hey, dude, I think you got some gold here.
Oh, it was great.
But again, I didn't know what I was doing making a film. Like, I really just went in this, eyes wide open, but not understanding. So anyway, we get back and we realize that this was a really good moment, and this was really telling. And then the movie continues to take on, this it's almost like a 2-part in 1-part movie. The first part is telling the story and understanding, and the second part is this pivot, and we follow. And it really foreshadows the type of documentaries that are being made now. At that point, HBO had never bought an outside sports documentary. So once the film was, I had it in rough cut. I got it to a buddy of mine, great guy, who was coaching girls lacrosse in Westchester. On the team was the daughter of an HBO executive. I gave him the DVD. He got the DVD to the father. The father at HBO watched it and says, "We love it. We were trying to do this story." Now, if they would have done the story, they would have done it from Billy Collins' perspective, like everybody else who had tried. I was like, listen, we don't have Billy Collins. We only have Louis. So let's tell it from his side of the story.
Very smart. Very smart.
Yeah, it was just like that was who we had access to. And then they came in at the end to kind of rework it, like that walking shot in the beginning of the movie and the walking shot out, that they filmed that with me. So it was a different type of, they really helped a lot. And at that, during that same year, there was ESPN had come up with this series called 30 for 30, which I'm sure your listeners know, and viewers know. And before we sold it to HBO, I had managed to get to a meeting with ESPN. And they were like, "Oh, we really like this." I showed them some rough material. "We really like this, but who are you?" I was like, "Well, and they said, listen, 30 for 30s, the original marketing model, it changed, was we're going to find 30 big-time directors, Barry Levinson, Ice Cube, big names, and we're going to say, all right, here's a budget, tell any sports story you want." And that was their marketing. They wanted to kind of like tell 30, and it was celebrating 30 years of ESPN and 30 films for it. Obviously, can't do many more. So they passed on it. And I got it to HBO and it worked out. And HBO gave me very small money, but it's okay. It didn't matter. And then that year, so sports documentaries all go to what's called the Sports Emmys, the National Sports Emmys. And out of everything at the Sports Emmys, the golden ring is the outstanding documentary. And that's something that HBO had run the table with for a long time, and ESPN was trying to get. Everybody's trying to get that. And to this day, ESPN has still never won it, just so you know. They've won a lot of Emmys, but never the outstanding sports documentary, which is hard to believe with everything that they produce. So,
and the budget, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Their budgets were big. So this first year was their first batch of 30 for 30s at the Emmys. So here we are going up against all the films. It was
Fernando Valenzuela, right?
Yeah, Valenzuela. And then there was Jimmy the Greek. There was the Len Bias story. I mean, really good stories that they had. And we get to the Emmys. I'm like, there's no way we're going to win. First of all, they never asked me how to pronounce my name. So if we win, they would probably, and not only that,
wing it. They're going to wing it.
They put me in a seat where there was a light bouncing off the teleprompter or the podium and going right in my eye. I couldn't even see.
Oh, jeez.
Anyway, they get to the Sports Emmys. To the category, and Jim Nantz announces Assault in the Ring. And I got to tell you, I was floored. So we won the Emmy. It was just unbelievable. We also, on a technicality, tried to get the case brought back to court because the Collins, who had been, who basically got nothing from New York State, had tried to sue. We found a way where there was negligence with the inspector. So you have to watch the movie to get into all of that.
Yeah.
So we almost got a new trial for the Collinses, who deserve something. I mean, their son was taken advantage of, and the inspector should have seen this. There's no way the inspector should have not known that horsehair padding was taken out of the glove, a plaster of Paris was put on the knuckles, and the New York State just walked away scot-free. So that was another thing that we tried to do, and we were very close. Anyway, we won the Emmy, and not soon after or before it screened, the publicist at HBO said, "Well, what's your next film?" I said, "Next film, I wasn't calling myself a filmmaker. We had just done this story that was great." So he said, "Well, you better get another film in the hopper because that's the first thing people are going to ask you. What's next?" So I wound up calling up Renee Richards, the transsexual tennis player from 1977, who I had a connection with just through he before he was a she was my sister's eye doctor. And so I called up and started working on that material. And as soon as we won the Emmy, I went to ESPN. I said, "What do you think of this?" And they said, "We'll take it." So my next film was on ESPN, and I've done over 20 films since. So that's how I got to making films.
Now, let me ask you. So I want to go back a little bit, just a little bit there. What do you think that this film, before the commission, they've now? I know it's a tragedy for the Collins, but it actually helped boxing in a way where you cannot, other than Margarito's situation,
Mm-hmm.
you are in a situation where you are closely monitored because they do not want a situation like this to happen again. So there is a positive out of that happened, right? When this obviously there's a good and a bad. They have the tragedy, and it's kind of like a triumph for Resto to relieve himself. When you do, what was your feeling when did you feel vindicated when they said assault in the ring, Eric Drath?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I just, these stories, and going back to your point about passion, like it's not just about having a good idea. You have to have the passion. And I had to make this film. I don't know how to explain it. Like, I've heard writers say that too. Like, there's just this story in you got to get out, and you wrestle with life until you get it out, and oh, this would be great. This would be great. The best piece of advice that I had was from a guy named Eisen Robbins, who made independent films. And I was telling him about this story before we made it. And I was like, look, this is great. Maybe we should hire a director. I mean, I wasn't a director. How do we do this? He goes, Eric, go buy a camera and make your damn film. Stop calling. You know what I mean? And so there's something about that. Like, yes, I was vindicated because I had this story, and then it got out there, and the world said, you know what, this is an important story. I've also.
Let's be clear though, too. When you said to go get a camera and do whatever, no YouTube, no nothing like that. You're on your own. So the kids who are watching this that are coming up with the YouTube set that could basically change the transmission on YouTube, you had zero. This was pure will and passion, and I will stick by that till the end of time.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, and a little naivety. I mean, I had no idea what we were doing or getting ourselves into. And I didn't realize that.
That's best. Sometimes that's best.
Yeah. I think if I would have known the slim chances of getting something put onto a broadcast network back then, it would have been so daunting, I might not have done it. But I had this, I was young, a lot younger, and I was like ready to, show the world that we could do this. But I think anybody who's got a great idea and has and feels that they need to do it needs to do it. It's not about like wanting to do something. Sometimes you just need to do it,
Now, before I go to your next project, or one, obviously that Assault in the Ring is my favorite of all time, but I do have one in particular that hits home. Do you have any regrets when you did that? When you were like, oh man, I wish this would have happened, or was there something that you wanted in there that you couldn't get, or there was a regret that you had and wish you could maybe do a part 2 somehow?
It's funny that you say that, because once HBO got involved, they were basically, I mean, we had a good rough cut, but they kind of like kicked me out of the edit room. Like, all right, thanks, kid. We'll take it from here.
Yeah.
And so there were certain things that I tossed and churned and couldn't sleep. I was this needs to be in the film. I can't believe it. I was ready to like walk away like some stupid young directors do. and now I look back, thank God I did it, because I watched the film, and this is not patting myself on the back in any way, but once it's out there and done, it is the film, and I'm really glad the way it is. Every scene, every moment, every edit is exactly the way it should have been. I wound up getting into Collins's father's house at the end.
I was going to ask you about that. That's one that I know it didn't end great, but I really wanted to hear what he had to say.
Yeah, I got into his house, and it was sad. First of all, this house was so small and so humble and so, this guy was still living from that night. He had been wronged. He lost his son. He lost, a lot of people think, his meal ticket out of poverty. I'm not sure, and I don't want to say whether that was his agenda with suing, but I thought he had a legitimate claim. I mean, the New York State Athletic Commission failed him that night. No doubt about it. There's just no doubt about it. Now, when you look at all the rules were antiquated. It said that, how do you define supervising? How do you, like there was, you could play with the word, right? You could play with the words, and that's what they did, and they lost.
Do you think he had a lot of guilt? Just guilt?
He had a lot of unresolved anger. I mean, he's passed. Okay. He's passed now. Yeah, I mean, look, a father losing a son, I can never make a comment. I only have daughters anyway, but still, the idea of losing a child is just, I don't think anybody can ever get over that. And then under the circumstances and just feeling so small against this powerful New York, and what that represented, and never being able to get out from under that big, powerful, feeling of New York and what it represented.
When you went up to his house in the documentary, he was in Tennessee, I believe it was Tennessee where he was. Was it very rural? So you had to feel like, man, this guy just lost everything.
Yeah,
in one night.
Well, I wasn't sure if I was going to hear a shotgun or what.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, look, I always tell my team, you can't make a documentary sitting in an office, and especially if you're at a network, you're not making good documentaries because you're sitting in fancy offices. You got to go out there and get dirty. You got to put yourself at risk. You got to do what you got to do. And that's how you make, because you got to do something that nobody else wants to do, because then they'll watch you do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. That's a little dangerous, though. I'll be fine with that. But one last thing before we get on to the next part again. I know, but the documentary, and people who haven't seen it, where can they go watch it? Because I've tried to find out. Is it on? It's not on Netflix. I tried to watch it last night, me and my wife. Or can they go to a website that they can get the video?
It was on Showtime, it was on HBO, and it was on ESPN, and it was on Amazon, and now it's going to be back on Amazon very soon.
Perfect.
In fact, yeah.
So. Assault in the Ring is the name of the project. Eric Drath is with us now, and he's the one who had directed it. It's a great documentary. Panama Lewis, okay. Did you ever try pushing back on him at all at the time where, because we all know what was going on here. He had been, blatantly, he spiked the drink of Aaron Pryor. So that was the first red flag of his career. Then he goes in and basically takes the padding out of the gloves. We know it was him. There's no doubt about it. Put the pastor of Paris on Louis' hands. Did you ever want to go to him and just say, no, we know you're lying? Or was that risky? You know what I'm saying? You say about getting into risk. That's risky, because I think there were some very strange characters in that gym with him at the time.
Oh yeah. There was a moment where like this big guy made it pretty clear he didn't want us in the gym. And again, that's part of the documentary style of capturing that, because it's in the film when he kicks us out. As a journalist, you also have this responsibility, as much as you have your own opinion what happened, to almost play stupid and almost be like, well, this person's saying this, what do you think? Like, journalism has changed so much. There's so much opinion where the guys that are saying they're giving their opinion. I always like to play it right down the middle and not give my opinion, and just ask the questions and create the opportunities for people to talk.
Oh, and hey, I'll tell you, it worked. It worked for Assault in the Ring, and it's worked in your next product that I saw. Which, matter of fact, I bought Showtime just for this piece. The Hector Camacho documentary. It was phenomenal. Hector Camacho of Puerto Rican descent. I am of Puerto Rican descent. He was big in our community. How was that project put together, and how when you did it? Was it what you expected, per se?
So,
Because they kind of took you in as family, to be quite honest with you. You were there with the mother, there with the sister. I mean, it was quite an interesting documentary, to say the least. But it's exactly how we are in our culture. That is exactly how his mom is. That is exactly how we are in this culture.
I love the Camacho family. They are so, just like you said, they are what you see. There's no fronting there. They are really, once you're in, you're in. Your family. I still on Facebook, communicate with them. Um, but here's again, a family that was living with a horrible tragedy. Their son was killed, and at first when I pitched the documentary, it was more along the lines of the murder and trying to find out what figure out who did the murder and why it's an unsolved murder. And so I went in more like that. And what I realized was that I was missing, again, there's these a moment. You're going through. We had this rough cut. And I got to just throw out Vinny Maharta from Showtime at the time and Steven Espinoza
Okay.
gave me the opportunity to make this. And thank God they are two phenomenal executives. They give you enough room where you can make your documentary, and then they had really, really smart notes. So they were just amazing to work with. But anyway, so I got to a point where it was much more of like the murder, this, and trying to solve it. And I realized there was something really big missing out of it: the incredible life and career of Camacho himself. So sometimes you need to go all the way one way and then realize, hey, we're missing. I mean, there was a little bit of it, but for context. And then I went back in and redid the film. So 6 weeks before we delivered the actual rough cut, which is very along the lines of what viewers see now, I had torn it apart and redid it. And that's just the process. But so it was really this combo hybrid of making sure that his legacy and his importance in boxing was known, and anybody who watched the movie understood how much he added to our sport and how important he was. And then also this idea of like, why can't they solve this murder that happened in Puerto Rico? And we put ourselves in some dangerous situations down there.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of them didn't even make the film. I mean, we were going at night in Catania, which is a very tough neighborhood where the murderers came from, and basically knocking on doors. And we had people that were working with us down there that didn't even want to be, that said, I won't go. So, we were in dangerous places where, native Puerto Ricans from the island were like, this is too dangerous for us. But it's an important story. And then, obviously at the end, there's that, if you watch it through and you see the credits and you realize, just how dangerous it is even today. One of the without giving out too much, but, one of the people that was involved, is murdered himself.
And again, I go back to this again from the top. The passion that you have to do a documentary and put yourself in harm's way, because believe me, my family's from Puerto Rico. It is not as nice of a tropical island that you want to be on. A lot of poverty. Hence, Camacho moving here. He makes all this tremendous amounts of money. Could have been a massive, massive superstar. And he was, but he was never the Tito Trinidad. He was never the Miguel Cotto. He was that way because of the flash and what he had. And they do fight differently in New York than they do in Puerto Rico. The Puerto Ricans there fight differently than the ones from the island. They just do. And he made his money there. But then it got out of control. But his mother, no matter what they did, and this is what something I took out of that film. You can say the drugs, you can say the way he dressed, the way he acted with all the women, the driving cars without licenses, and all that nonsense. His mother and his family still loved him, and they cherished him beyond what is. And you could see that by the way they treated you in the film.
Yeah, I mean, all the movies that I make, are really not about the sport. This was a mother-son story. Resto is a story of redemption. No Mas was about, Duran, facing his truth or not facing his truth. I did the film on Tapia, Johnny Tapia, same kind of thing. Renee Richards was about it's a father-son story. So what really got me here was his mom. Camacho's mom is one of the most beautiful souls. Not perfect in all ways, but perfect in all ways, if that makes any sense. I know that's oxymoronic, but just a person who just loved, and is still so hurt and deserved justice and never has gotten the justice. And the reason why is because it's so dangerous in Puerto Rico. They know who committed the murders, but nobody will come out on the stand and say it because it's a no snitch environment. And that's tragic.
It reminds me of the legendary Bruiser Brody story back in Puerto Rico when he went. Was a professional wrestler. Went there. He was killed by one of the wrestlers in the locker room. Someone saw it. Someone saw him do it. Nobody. They did the trial before he was even called to subpoena to testify. Jose Gonzalez is still out there alive, and he murdered Bruiser Brody. It is a different culture out there. It's almost honor amongst thieves. And similar to the way boxing is similar to that, where it's the wild, wild west. Yeah. And my question to you would be this: did you ever think you'd be this involved in boxing on this journalistic level?
No, but now it makes sense. It didn't really make sense while I was doing it, but now look, I love the news. I'll always be a journalist. Mm-hmm. And I love boxing, and I really love boxing because I'm fascinated by the sport, and I have a love for the athletes. I for about 5 years I was an agent representing, before I made the Resto film, I was representing fighters and bringing them to Europe for mostly opponents. And there I got to spend a lot of time with, the B-sides of these cards and saw what was going on. And, no matter how much, I thought they had a chance to win, they never had a chance to win. And I'm an underdog guy. I love the underdog story. So, it makes sense now why I've done so many films about boxing, but it certainly didn't make sense originally.
Well, I could tell you, Eric, I have followed your career since its inception here that I've known about you when you finally got that big break. And the next stop that you have, in my opinion, will be the International Boxing Hall of Fame, which you deserve at this point right now. Right now, if you retired today, you would have my vote because you're documentaries, and I'm a documentary guy. I don't get into the Netflix miniseries and stuff. I'm a documentary guy, straightforward, journalistic like you do. It's truly an honor to actually talk to you and speak with you because this is something that needs to be told. And you've been telling the stories for years and doing it on your perspective and in a non-biased basis. These times are just crazy, but you do it right. And if there's anyone that can get a hold of you, how would they want to get a hold of you right now?
I guess the easiest is probably by email. They could send an email to Eric Drath, one word, at yahoo.com. That's my personal email. They can send me an email. It's fine.
And I'll tell you, Eric, everything you've ever done, I've been a fan of. Continue to do the good work. I know you got a bunch of stuff in. Would you come back at some time to tell us about the stuff that you got going on?
George, I'd love to. I'm working on a project now, and as soon as I get the go ahead, I'm coming back to you, and we'll figure out how to break it here first.
Well, I appreciate it, Eric. As always, again, it is an honor, and you're right there in the Poconos. You didn't tell me you're right there at the Poconos. I could have drove up and take it to Mount Airy Lodge. It's a great casino.
I love it. Next time we'll do it in person.
We should. I got the studio here. It's not far away. Hey, listen, I own a bagel shop. This is what I do. I'm a bagel guy. You're a Jewish guy. We're good fit here. Good fit.
I love the Puerto Rican people, so I'm sure you make a great bagel.
I certainly do. Eric, as always, a pleasure to have you on, and we'll look forward to coming on next time.
Great. Thanks, George.
Thanks, Eric.
All right.
Thanks for watching the Zapata Brand podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast and listen where all podcasts are available.